President of this chapter of BNI. I'm a lawyer, so Snedden Hall Gallop, and as a law firm we have been in BNI for 8 years, so pretty much since it began here in Canberra. And it's really been an interesting thing for me personally, and I'll get back to that a bit later on, but just to see how the chapter has grown and how BNI as a concept has grown. Ian mentioned during the introduction just some of the statistics about BNI and the numbers of chapters that are around the world. Obviously, those of you who are here probably get an inkling that BNI seems a bit American. It's got a real structure to it. There's a real way that it follows through, and definitely its roots are in the USA. That's where it was developed by a gentleman called Ivan Misner. If you read Ivan Misner's books or listen to any of his speeches, effectively he got sick of going to networking functions where you basically were balancing a glass of wine and a plate of food and collecting business cards and trying to shake people's hands and then trying to remember who you just met. So the idea was to come up with a more structured way of actually doing networking. How that has translated, I think, for us and for people here in Australia and Canberra specifically, is it's actually a way of actually encouraging people who otherwise wouldn't even consider going to those sort of networking events or wouldn't get anything out of those networking events to really get something special out of BNI. And so that's what I thought I'd talk a bit about. Now, I just did the Vice President's report and I talked about $300,000 worth of business over the last 6 months. That's just in this chapter. So in this chapter we have approximately 25 permanent members. So effectively $300,000 divided by 25 people is how much business we're in theory doing per member. So at the first instance, it's a pretty good way, it's a pretty good return on investment for one meeting a week and your membership fees. But BNI is a lot more than that dollar figure. And this is really what I wanted to focus on today. Ash gave during his education session one of my favourite analogies for BNI. That is that it's about planting, it's about farming rather than hunting. And that's something that really, when you think about the way these meetings are structured, really comes out. There's a story about a person who wanted to grow a lemon tree. And he bought a tree that was sort of already pretty strong. It was a little baby tree, didn't have any fruit on it yet. Bought it from the nursery and went and put it in the ground, watered it a little bit, and then left it there and said, okay, give me some lemons. Month down the track, there were no lemons. It hadn't really changed much at all. 2 months down the track, still no lemons. A year down the track, and still really, maybe a little bit of movement, the occasional little bit of fruit, but not the huge, bountiful array of lemons that he was hoping for. So he dug up the tree. He moved it to a different spot in his garden, and then a month down the track, there were no lemons. And 2 months down the track, there were still no lemons. And 12 months down the track, he's like, this tree is useless. So he dug it up and he moved it somewhere else in his garden. And what he was doing each time he was moving this lemon tree around was effectively starting the process all over again. Compare that to the person who buys a lemon tree and knows that it takes a number of years before the lemon tree really gets into its full bloom and becomes a fruit-bearing tree. Leaves it somewhere in the garden, but really nourishes it. Lots of fertiliser, lots of tender, loving care, and then sees in a few years' time huge amounts of fruit coming from that lemon tree. BNI is a bit like the lemon tree. It's not something that you can just whack in the ground and hope that it'll bloom, and then if it doesn't, you move on and try something else. BNI is all about the relationships. It's about the fertiliser. It's about the tender loving care that you give to this chapter. And that's something that really we try and foster at the federal chapter, is that we have 25 members. We all really know one another on a personal level and trust each other. And so with the lemon tree, we're fertilising that relationship by coming along to the weekly meetings, and you'll hear soon also meeting each other out of the weekly meetings in what's called a dance card. That's where 1 or 2 or 3 of us get together and have a bit of a chat outside of this structure, maybe over a coffee or, if we're lucky, a glass of wine. So it's all about that fertiliser, that growing the relationship and not giving up after a year when there hasn't been much of a fruit. And then saying, okay, well, in another year's time, or maybe it'll take 18 months, maybe it'll take 3 years, but you know that one day down the path there will be a whole bountiful array of lemons on that tree. So how do we fertilise the tree? And what I wanted to do is think about a few different ways. Thanks.
There is a wives' tale.
There is an old wives' tale about the best way to fertilise lemon trees, and that doesn't work in this room.
But you've got the listening.
The bathrooms are just out there and up the hallway. But it is about coming out of the shell a little bit, and I think that for a lot of people joining BNI can seem pretty daunting. A few of you just made the comment, I wasn't really prepared for this, I haven't prepared anything to say. And there is that really structured environment where we do stand up and talk about ourselves, and you have to actually get good at selling yourself. And that's really a fantastic way of growing your ability to talk about yourself. And BNI is supportive. Everyone here gets along well. We have the occasional joke, but never really at each other's expense. And then it's sort of a matter of, well, what am I going to say about my business, and how am I going to tell people about the sorts of clients that make a good client for me, or the sorts of referrals that I want. And as you go through BNI, and as I said, I've been here for on 8 years, you get a lot better at developing that ability to talk about yourself and really get used to selling yourself, effectively what it comes down to. The other great thing about BNI for me is look around the room, all the different people you get to meet. People from areas and professions that otherwise you really wouldn't have any way of knowing. And I think that that's really a fantastic way for someone, when I first joined, was very fresh out of law school, didn't have all the contacts that, say, the senior partners in my firm had. I'd look at them and say, how do they know all these people? They have a client who needs a builder, they pick up the phone and they're immediately talking to one. They have a client who needs a graphic designer, they pick up the phone. I was like, well, I'm never going to be that person. But then you come to something like BNI and you realise, well, actually, I do know a security consultant, and I do know an events organiser at a hotel. And all those sorts of things, suddenly you go, well, actually I do have networks, and that's through BNI. So that's really good for someone like me, and for anyone who's in business, to go and meet people that otherwise they may not get to meet. I guess the last thing I wanted to talk about was how then that translates to being really good for our clients and for our customers. And I suppose you heard Ian say before the terminology is giver's gain. And we don't really sit around the table talking about how much can I get. We're not sitting there saying, okay, how come I haven't received enough referrals this week or this month or whatever. It's more about how much we can give. And as Ian says, the more we give, the more we get in return. And that's the principle of BNI, is that givers gain. But when you think about that in the purest sense, it's about how we can give to our customers, our contacts and our clients. And I really find that BNI comes into its own when you look at that. You can take one person and know that they might need 10 different professions from this room, and between us we can liaise, we can work together to get that person the best possible deal. So Aniko is a really great example of that, if you don't mind me singling you out. Aniko, how many people must you see in a weekend coming through looking at buying and selling houses? 60, exactly. Heaps and heaps of people. And pretty much every Tuesday morning when Aniko's here, she's been able to refer people because they've come and they said, well, we know we want to buy a house but we don't have finance. So she's been able to refer them to Glenn for mortgage broking services. It's someone who's selling their house but they need to clean it up first, so she's been able to refer them to Chris for some cleaning. Or Brian to do some touch-up work on their floors. So immediately you see these networks are just growing. Another common one that works for me a lot is the business area. So we get people who are starting up a new business, so they need a lawyer to help them with that business. They need an accountant, they need a bookkeeper, they need insurance. We've got a couple of insurance brokers here today. Maybe they need a bit of coaching in the way they run their business. So David with the business coaching. And they need security at their business. So Lisa's business with security. Then of course there's the marketing side of it. So a new business needs to think about what it's going to look like, how it's going to brand itself, how it's going to communicate. So we've got Ash, we've got Anne, we've got Derek. It's an amazing array of people just in one room who can help. And I haven't mentioned everyone in that. But you get the idea that from one person, one referral can grow this whole web of different people who need assistance. The other one that we often talk about is people having a baby. When you have a baby, there are so many different businesses you don't really think about, but then you need to get involved. A florist is a good one, a photographer. Alexandra and the wool shed. Alexandra has great products for babies, so anyone who's having a baby, head out there and have a look at that. But then obviously other things like